What's a time where all they had to do was ask instead became a bigger deal than it should have? So I used to have this guy on my team who refused to ask for time off. He would instead plan a vacation and just call in sick every day. I don't like to ask for doctor's notes, but I have to if someone is calling out day after day after day. So I would check in with him. By this point, he would be sick for several days straight. Then he would get mad and explode into a rant about how I never give him vacation. He accused me of playing favorites, citing that I let such and such go to Disney last month and I let someone go to Europe for a couple of weeks over the summer, and he never gets that same concession. And every time I would ask the same question, why didn't you just ask for the time off? Because it's BS, I have my time, I should be able to use it however the hell I want. Okay, I agree, so why can't you just do that? Why can't you just say which days you need for vacation? Why do we have to create conflict? How exactly is trying to skirt a very basic PTO procedure and suspiciously calling in sick every day for a week easier than just submitting your vacation time like everyone else? I never got a legitimate answer, just hemming and hawing about how everything is BS and somehow rigged against him. The really crappy part is he would have legitimate sick days, but because of how he tried to misuse his sick time, we had to be on top of it if he started to do 2 days in a row, etc. And he always acted like people were being unreasonable with him. Fortunately, he was gone not long after that. The definition of playing the system, but in the worst possible way. Story 2. Oof. When I graduated high school, I received a scholarship to study abroad in Germany for 1 year and live with a host family. After the honeymoon phase passed, my host mom was on the phone every week with the organization that sponsored me, complaining about things I did that she didn't like. For example, throwing away school papers in the small receptacle in my bedroom. I never put food, trash, or anything other than recyclable paper in the bin, which for the record was already there when I moved in. The family said I could use their house phone whenever I wanted to call my fellow American friend who was on the same scholarship. Apparently, I was misusing this privilege. These are just a few examples. It was definitely not a language barrier issue since she spoke fluent English. The sponsor threatened to send me home, so I called them and explained to them that she wasn't communicating her issues to me directly. I was none the wiser that I was doing anything wrong until my sponsor would tell me so. Thankfully, they finally listened and told host mom to start talking to me about her issues directly and that they weren't going to take any more phone calls from her. Story 3. He had all these expectations that he never communicated, namely bringing the trash out for them and walking with him and his daughter to and from pre-K in the mornings and afternoons. I cooked for them, I read to her, etc. I wasn't a slouch of a guest. So years ago, I spent a couple of days over at my father's house with his living girlfriend. My stay over was more business than personal. After my visit concluded and my father was driving me to my sister's place in another town where I was to spend another couple of days, while driving, my father told me that his girlfriend thought I was a bad guest. I asked him why she thought that. He said it was because after having dinner on my first night there, I didn't do her dishes. This is one of the reasons why I don't like going over other people's houses. Not for a few days or even for just a couple of hours. I inevitably wind up accidentally breaking some unknown, unspoken rule of the house and making my hosts unhappy. Truthfully, it didn't occur to me to do their dishes or offer to do so. The second after finishing dinner, immediately before I could say or do anything, my father started gathering our plates and utensils from the table and putting them in the dishwasher. Sitting there after dinner, never having been to my father's house before, I really didn't know what I should or shouldn't do next. Had she or my father spoken up and asked me to do the dishes, I would have done so. The thing is that my father and his girlfriend hate doing housework, so they hire a housekeeper to come over a few times a week to clean the house for them. But she expects her guests to do the housework for her as well? Story 4. In law school, we did a big mock settlement negotiation. Each person had a goal they wanted and a minimum they would compromise for. I was playing the victim who was going to get a settlement payout. I wanted money, but my assigned minimum was that I was not going to walk away without an apology. That was all I really wanted. The negotiation spiraled and dragged on into a standstill because despite it costing them nothing, nobody on the other side was willing to give an apology. Everyone was too worried that an apology might look like admitting fault or giving ground. In reality, it would have given them everything they wanted. It was probably one of the most important lessons I learned in law school. Don't get so hung up on the argument and details that you forget that the people you are dealing with are people, usually people who are stressed out and hurting. Story 5. I clean houses for a living and I try to communicate with my clients, but especially people who have never had help before tend to feel weird asking for certain things. Miss B had us for almost a year when she finally showed me a list of all the things I've missed or not known. She is there when we clean. She could have told me at any time, but chose to bottle her frustrations up. I had to talk her down from canceling her services and told her I'm also human, I miss things, so does helper here. But we are always happy to correct it before we leave and going forward if we know. And somehow we haven't had any issues since. Just talk to me. Yeah, it feels like it is hard for some people to make requests in person. Story 6. A few years ago, a taxpayer got a letter saying he owed a ton of money and he needed to send documents in. Those letters are 100% automated and automatically assigned to auditors. This guy calls me one day, flipping his lid, just screaming at me. Won't let me get a word in at all. He slams the phone down, calls again, yells some more. He repeated this 3 times. Then I refused to pick up. 52 calls later, security and IT intercept and pull his number. For 3 days, they required me to walk out with the police officer because of his threats. So why did he get a letter? He entered his income incorrectly and added several zeros. All we needed was a copy of his W-2, which was written in the letter. Story 7. My mother-in-law is being really passive-aggressive about not getting to spend time with her grandbabies. She's got an autoimmune disease, but I am still able to keep a really busy schedule in her 60s all over town. She'll passively say to my father-in-law or sister-in-law that she's mad she doesn't get more time with her grandkids. She could just talk to us directly and we could work something out, but hearing it through a grapevine is super annoying. Also, it's 100% her schedule, but she doesn't realize that her schedule doesn't really allow for a lot of grandkids' time. She's usually got meetings or volunteering through most of the day and is upset the babies are asleep by 7:30. Story 8. When I was married, my husband was friends with a guy named Jake. We would sometimes hang out with Jake and his family, but I could never seem to fit in no matter how hard I tried. One of Jake's daughters was about 12 years old, named Lacey. One day, 3 years after I'd met them all, we'd been hanging out with the family for the day. On the way home, out of nowhere, my husband absolutely rips me a new one because it turns out Lacey's name was actually Lace, and I'd been calling her the wrong name for 3 years, and everybody thought I was a complete schmuck because of it. Apparently for 3 years, they'd been dropping hints that this kid's name was Lace, and I just kept calling her Lacey, and everybody was sick of it and thought I was a complete and utter witch. Like, what the heck? 3 years later, they let this resentment fester? Hi, Lacey. How's school going? Actually, it's Lace, but school's going good. At no point in the preceding 1,095 days did that super simple conversation happen. Like, why? We got divorced not too long after that, so I never saw Lace again anyway. Story 9. This is a really dumb one. I work at a food production facility. The company generously provides plastic silverware for the break room. Recently, they have been putting down on labor cost and product waste. Essentially, we are losing money because of this economic slump, and they're trying to trim the fat. One day, the plastic silverware ran out in the lunchroom. It ended up being out for a week. A bunch of employees took this as a sign of the company cutting costs and they can't afford silverware anymore, that we all need to start looking for new jobs as it is going under. Some are claiming that the company doesn't care for the employees and are trying to make the break room inhospitable. Y'all, no one told the managers we were out. All I did was literally ask the manager why there wasn't any silverware in the break room, and he was like, "Oh, you're out? I'll order more." Story 10. Maybe not exactly the same thing, but my supervisor had an unofficial policy that if you got all your work done and communicated with her, you could leave a little early each day for doctor's appointments, other obligations, etc. It was a level of flexibility and professional trust that really helped with morale. But a couple people started taking advantage of it and would just leave whenever they felt like it or were done with their work for the day without communicating, which is the only thing our supervisor asked for. So unfortunately, she had to go back to the official policy, which is that everyone has to stay in the office on the clock for their entire shift, and any requests to leave early had to be formally submitted and approved as PTO days in advance, save for emergencies. Supervisor literally said all they had to do was ask me. That was my only rule. A reminder that even the most flexible of workplaces can't survive the wrath of a few lazy employees. Story 11. We remodeled our back garden about 10 years ago. There were some complaints about planning, but we were found to be within our rights for all the work we wanted to do. The wall between our garden and our neighbors was about 1 meter high at the top of the garden and 1.5 meters high at the bottom. We used to chat with our neighbor over the wall regularly, so I didn't want to change that dynamic. One day I heard raised voices and went out to find my neighbor arguing with the brickie who was rebuilding the wall. When I arrived, the brickie asked me how high I wanted the wall. I said, keep it the same height as it was, just not falling down like it was, hoping to get a smile. My neighbor snorted, glared at me, then walked off. Later that afternoon, a handwritten note came through the door telling us to never speak to him again unless it was through a solicitor. He hasn't spoken to us since. Turns out he wanted to do his garden and make it a bit more private. He wanted a higher wall of 2 meters. If he just said that at the time and asked, we'd have built the wall to the height he wanted and just charged for the extra material and work. Instead, he's now a sad, lonely old man who goes back into the house whenever he sees us. Story 12. I'm a professor. The end of course paper is worth a significant part of the grade. It's a case study with a kind of prescriptive format. While I think I've been clear about my expectations, I'm definitely looking for the information to be organized and presented in a specific way. Through the past few months, we've had a few 0-point deliverables for them to submit outlines and working drafts for comment. About half the class hasn't turned anything in. No big deal, it's not for a grade. It's literally just an opportunity to get some feedback. Up until the week that the papers are due, I'm so eager to provide feedback. I very much feel like I'm willing to help them as much as I can up until it's due. All they need to do is ask. Now that the course is about to close, I'm getting the sense that a few students are starting to panic. The papers are due next week, and I've had a few students reach out asking for me to read their 10-plus page drafts and ask for extensions. I'm for sure not taking time away from my family over the Thanksgiving holiday because you haven't planned ahead. I genuinely don't think I could have made myself any more available over the lead up to the due date. It's due when it's due. If a student didn't take advantage of the past month and they turn in a lemon of a final product, well, tough crap. Story 13. 2 weeks ago, I went to a concert with my friend, Lily, and her friend, Grace. Got some vibes from Grace at the concert, so I asked Lily if I had been mentioned between them two at all because I didn't want to read into it too much and they were really close friends and live on the same property and hang out daily. She said I hadn't come up, but she would be willing to get any info for me and even wingman to try and make it happen. I was like, cool. Grace and I made plans to go through another concert with just the two of us in a couple of days, and I'm sure I'll figure it out then, but I'll let her know. Fast forward a couple of days, and it turns out we did like each other and matched each other's energy completely. We spend the weekend together at my place and wake up Monday to both of us being blocked by Lily. Turns out Lily had a thing for Grace and was trying to rope her into a throuple with her and her husband. She didn't tell me this, she didn't tell Grace this, and Grace isn't interested in her like that anyway, even though she is bi and poly. She thought she was just a really good friend and didn't realize Lily had other intentions. I obviously had no clue either. If Lily had just told me when I first asked about Grace, I would have backed off out of respect for my best friend. But I'm glad she didn't say anything because Grace and I are basically inseparable at this point. But I feel like I lost a close friend over an easily avoidable situation. Lily has been nasty and mean to Grace in the time since and made her home life pretty uncomfortable. So Grace has been happily chilling at my place most of the time, which I'm sure is just making Lily even more upset at the both of us. She still hasn't spoken to me about it. I only found out by asking her husband why I was blocked on all socials. Story 14. Happens in prison all the time. Can't really blame them. I was a bit of an anomaly as a corrections officer. Had a bachelor's, etc. Minimum requirement is GED. You'd have some 5'0" rookie frothing at the mouth because an inmate passed an item. So the sergeant had us tear the dude's cell apart because he was passed a bit of coffee from his neighbor. It's a mix of not giving a heads up and technically it is against the rules, but I never bothered with pro-social behavior. I wasn't there to keep them from making their time manageable. I saw the job as keeping them away from the public and from each other. I worked in a living unit and I was very honest about the situation. There's 3 of us and up to 250 of them at any given time. We're not going to catch everything, probably didn't catch most things, but I did eliminate unnecessary issues by being lenient on some things. 5 extra minutes on the phone? Sure. Give your neighbor a soup? Why not? I even understood haircuts to a point. Tattoos were a hard no due to the constant medical headaches they cause. Some, actually many, would say that I was compromised by showing a little humanity, that they're mistreating me for 5 minutes extra on the phone. To me, it was just giving them rope if they were misusing it for nefarious means. Maybe, but I bet the majority just wanted 5 more minutes to speak to their loved ones the 2 times a day they get to. I always kept records of anything I did or any pass I gave, so if they turned up with something foul, I can go to the investigations team and have them check the recordings with times and dates. This is all a really long way to say that in prison, as long as I knew what was going on, I'd let a lot slide because passing food or sharing a meal in the day room doesn't hurt crap. Just give me a heads up or ask. Story 15. This is kind of a different one, but the same spirit. I played over half of Resistance Fall of Man PS3 launch title without jumping because I never tried to. I'd been playing a ton of Time Splitters Future Perfect where you can't jump. It was just kind of ingrained into my head that that wasn't a possibility. So when I started playing Resistance, I'd see things that I had to jump to get to, weapons, health, etc., and just think, must be kind of a secret or mechanic I'll get later, making it accessible on New Game Plus. Finally, I got to a portion of the game where I had to jump to progress and was so confused. I'd figured out other jumps. I thought they were puzzles earlier in the game, but was just stumped on this one. I thought, maybe there's something to interact with and the prompts just aren't showing up. So I walked around pressing square. One of the times I randomly hit X and was just dumbfounded as I did the most basic thing with the most basic button. The rest of the game became much easier. Story 16. I used to work as a supervisor at a water park. On all the slides, top and bottom, there were signs and a recording in multiple languages saying, remove all loose articles before riding. Of course, every day people wouldn't heed the signs, the recordings, or the lifeguards, and they'd go down with loose cash, sunglasses, and other assorted articles of the loose and or valuable variety. For many attractions, it was as easy as the bottom lifeguard walking up a slide and picking things up in 6 inches or less of water. No problem. However, other slides had pools that you'd go out into. Very dangerous to have people in the water, so we couldn't look for things without stopping the dispatch, which meant the line would get longer and people would complain. Our usual SOP was that we would stop the dispatch if the line was short and or we hadn't stopped recently, and either the supervisor or the guard would dive and retrieve any lost articles. Those articles were supposed to be delivered to our guest services to be logged for a stat of items lost and claims, but it was generally cool if someone gave an explicit description of the article. One day, I was at the bottom of a ride with a catch pool monitoring the dispatch, and a guy came down, lost his glasses that were on his head, and he immediately turned around and started diving for them himself. The guard is yelling, I start yelling, we stop dispatch when it's clear he isn't listening and almost gets clobbered twice. This pool had a pretty wicked water current, so the guy had no idea what he was doing and clearly couldn't see them. So he finally came out. He now locks onto me, yelling at him and with the supervisor outfit on, and starts laying it into me about his $300 Ray-Bans that I'd better get for him right now. I let him yell me back a few steps to clear the water and line and resume dispatch, and I explained to him that what he did was incredibly dangerous, and the priority is his safety. Sunglasses are easy to retrieve once he's clear. He wasn't hearing a word, screaming, more screaming, threats and hand gestures and all. Another supervisor had come over to back me up and called security. They arrived and basically told him to shut up or he'd be escorted out. I told him I'd be happy to get his glasses. I just needed him to clear the exit and disengage so that I could get in the water. Nope, still screaming. My manager makes it out from her office, sort of pushes me out of the way and gets his attention, and I get in the water. Unfortunately, his Ray-Bans got extremely scratched up from the bottom of the pool and the lenses were basically ruined. If only he just exited the pool and asked or actually held on to them in the first place. And if you're enjoying the video, learning a thing or two, please don't forget to hit that subscribe and like button for more videos just like this. Story 17. So when I'm laid off for the winter, seasonal work, I do gig work for a company that basically provides designated drivers. You drive to where you want to party, drink, smoke, whatever, we come and drive you home in your car when you're done. Ottawa has a lot of semi-rural, high-income suburbs, and we offer a more personal and classier experience than Uber or a cab, and public transit barely goes to these areas even during rush hour. It's actually a super fun job, and you meet interesting people who drive some incredible cars. So many Porsches, Audis, and Mercedes, even drove an AMG GT. Well, St. Patrick's Day 2024, I was out doing drives, and it was shockingly slow. We sat around for over 2 hours after our first drive and got nothing, so dispatch told us to head home for the night. I drop off my partner and head home. I hop on the major highway that runs through the city, and about 150 meters in front of me, an SUV drifts into a K-rail where there was some construction. Now, if you've ever seen cars hit these concrete barriers at speed, you know that it makes the car hop. The SUV hops, spins out, and smashes into some portable water jug barriers. I got so lucky the people behind me were all paying attention, debris everywhere, and I had to slam on the brakes and come to a stop on a highway where everyone is doing over 100 kilometers per hour. Everyone behind me realized what was happening and was able to stop. We checked on the driver, absolutely hammered. So hammered I originally thought he had an injury. And I was so angry, I waited for the cops, filled out a statement, everything. The cop was blown away when I told her what I was coming from doing. They know us and what we do and are generally very appreciative of what we do. All this dude had to do was frickin' call me, like literally, we were doing nothing. We could have been anywhere in Ottawa in 20 minutes, but no, he didn't. He could have harmed someone and he did almost end himself and now had a whole whack of charges against him and I will have to show up for court. Even if he was broke, the boss would have sent us out anyways and would have just dealt with the dude later in the week when he was sober. We are a flexible company like that and the boss would have made sure we got paid even if he didn't. All this guy had to do was ask. Story 18. Trump could have simply said he made a mistake in a tweet when he mentioned Alabama on September 1st, 2019. South Carolina, North Carolina, Georgia, and Alabama will most likely be hit much harder than anticipated. There was no storm threat to Alabama. It was insignificant, but he refused to ask for little forgiveness for such a minor mistake. The above tweet was refuted within 20 minutes by a tweet by a National Weather Service office in Alabama. Later that day, on September 1st, Trump doubled down with reporters that the hurricane was a potential threat to Alabama. As of that morning when he tweeted, Alabama instead experienced no ill effects of the storm that had moved northeast to Georgia. There was no model even the day before the tweet that predicted an Alabama track. September 2nd, he criticized one of the reporters for fact-checking him and called the fact-checking phony. From the Oval Office, on September 4th, he had an official National Weather Service map from the days leading up to the storm making landfall. It had been altered by hand to look like the hurricane was going to threaten Alabama. It had been altered with a black Sharpie. Trump was known for using Sharpies on the campaign trail and during his presidency. Note, this Oval Office video was days after the hurricane and served no other purpose but to try to support his claim that he was right. Then, Trump had NOAA release a statement on the 6th about tropical storm winds in Alabama, which meteorologists immediately panned and refuted. Then NOAA partially took it back in another statement. Then the Trump administration, Wilbur Ross, reportedly called and threatened the head of NOAA with staff firings. It's bizarre. All he had to do was say he mistweeted. Simple, but his ego can't let him ever acknowledge even the slightest fault. He was a laughingstock for making something big and memorable out of something so trivial. I'm glad it wasn't a serious enough storm threat that Trump would nuke the hurricane. Story 19. Previous housemates accused my husband of mistreating one of them. I think it's a load of bull considering they were very obviously clashing personalities along with how they handled everything in general. He literally said a few days beforehand that he was close to leaving anyway because the whole situation was reminding him of his mistreatment when he was younger. They could have told him right at that moment to go ahead and leave. Instead, they decided to go from 0 to 100 and send a message to all of our friends, except him, about all this stuff he was doing and that he stole her garments, which for one, we knew they would go into our room without permission, and two, considering the kind of person he is behind closed doors with me, it didn't really track right. It ended up leading to all of our friends basically deserting the two of them. Oh yeah, plus I think they planned it so I would stay there because I have receipts that they stopped paying me for utilities in December of last year. I've been very tempted lately to go scorched earth and put a public post on Facebook about it, since I have one of their moms on Facebook. I won't openly drop names because some people will know who I'm talking about, and I don't try to bring in more people towards them personally. They've messaged me after I've left, and not once was it brought up after they were informed they never paid me for bills. Story 20. Oh man, I just remembered one. When my wife and I were dating, we did long distance. It was hard, but we made it through. Well, I'm hanging out with my cousin because it's her birthday. We were all close as kids, so we hung out like siblings. Seriously, she was like another sister to me. Anyways, my cousin does modeling and is an influencer. Not big time, mind you, but has a decent following. She posted a picture with myself and my sisters. For additional context, I am the only boy in my house and have 4 sisters, saying how she loved that we came to surprise her for her birthday and how it was all my idea. Now, I can kind of forgive this because I have a mixed family and am myself mixed. My cousin and 3 sisters are white as Wonder Bread. Anyways, my wife's younger sister and her ex-husband get all up in the comment section being like, this doesn't look like my wife, and starting this drama. I will admit seeing it at first glance, I could see how you get there, but one of the hashtags was like best family ever or something. Instead, they jumped to conclusions and freaked out. They get my wife involved and she says, why did you ask me about the post if you were concerned? You just commented? Or why didn't you just reach out to him? Again, I can kind of understand, but like it was unnecessarily dramatic. The irony being that the younger sister and her now ex are divorced due to infidelity. Go figure. Story 21. This was told to me by my ex-classmate. When he was in primary school on his first day of school during morning period, he had the urge to whiz really bad, but he didn't want to raise his hand and ask for permission to leave because the teacher said something along the lines of, I don't like it when students frequently excuse themselves to use the toilet during my lesson. The teacher sounded very intimidating too, so he didn't raise his hands and kept it in for the whole morning until he just couldn't. The teacher was shocked when he whizzed all over his seat and asked him why don't he just raise his hands to ask permission to leave for the toilet. And the boy innocently looked up to him and said it's because he didn't like it when students excuse themselves for the toilet during his lessons. Story 22. I don't know if this counts, but I am going through a situation right now. BF and I broke up after we voted on election day due to being incompatible. He also told me I had 45 days to find a new place and he'd be willing to extend it if I couldn't find anything by that time, and that I could keep gifts and certain things like the extra TV and a laptop. So I thought everything was fine, but I knew it was going to be awkward for a bit. He even invited me to go to the Renaissance Fair, but I declined because I was still processing all this as well as having to deal with background checks for a new job that he helped me get into. I managed to find a place and give him a timeline of when I expect to have all my stuff gone from his place. I was able to pack almost everything in like a day or two. I thought he'd be glad that I was making progress so quickly, but ever since then, he has given me passive-aggressive/backhanded comments, constantly asking me if I had contacted my friend to make sure I get more of my stuff out, even though I'm waiting for a bed delivery and he got all my stuff and put into a corner of our room without asking. I've been making sure that he doesn't get involved in helping me move out. The thing is, he told me that he felt we were incompatible for months. I honestly kind of saw this coming since he always seemed bothered whenever I was around, and whenever I asked, he would tell me not to assume. I wish he had broken up with me sooner or communicated to me that whatever I was doing wrong was a deal breaker for him, but they came off as snide remarks or unserious jokes. And now I'm dealing with the contempt and resentment because of months of him stewing. I'm just trying to keep it together and not show him how much this all hurts me, keep it amicable, and make this as easy for the both of us. Now, if you'll excuse me, I plan on being single for the next 5 years. Story 23. So I work in a hospital and I had a patient admitted after falling and fracturing something. I tell her after leaving the room to hit the call light if she needs to go to the bathroom or if she needs me for whatever reason. She's upset, but agrees. A few minutes later, I hear her bed alarm going off, alerting us that she's gotten out of bed. So I run over to find her walking to the bathroom. I help her out and then tell her that she needs to call and ask for help if she's going to get up. She gets upset, saying, "What if I don't get there soon enough?" and she whizzes the bed. I tell her that I try to come as soon as I can, but I would much rather have to clean up some whiz than have her fall and fracture something else. She agrees again that she'll call, but 10 minutes later, she's getting up by herself again. This goes on for the rest of my shift, even though I remind her each time that she could seriously get hurt if she doesn't call. And before anyone says anything, no, she didn't have dementia. She was completely sound of mind, just very stubborn. So anyways, I leave for work and come back a couple days later, and you'll never guess what happened. This woman got up in the middle of the night by herself, fell, and fractured multiple vertebrae. So yeah, if only she didn't have to do it her way and just asked for help, she would have saved herself a lot of time, pain, and money. Story 24. Oh man, when I was a kid, I moved with my mom and stepdad to a new town. I was a nerdy kid, didn't have any friends. That summer, my mom encouraged me to make some friends and get outside. There were some kids my age who played baseball. I showed up and embarrassed myself big time. I couldn't throw, couldn't catch. My life was over at that moment. There were 8 of these guys, and to field a baseball team, you need 9. The best player lived next to me, and he befriended me and told me to come back to the ballpark to play. Benny was cool, taught me how to catch, encouraged the other guys to include me, even gave me a new baseball hat. Over the summer, the other guys came around. Whenever we played, though, and someone hit a homer, it went over this fence where this dog lived. Not even really a dog, it's more like a monster. I mean, this dog had already harmed kids, so when the ball went over the fence, that was usually the end of that ball. Well, one day, a home run was hit early in the day, and that was our only ball, and we couldn't afford a new one. Everyone was bummed, but I remembered my stepdad had a ball in his den. I ran home and grabbed it so we could keep playing. Since I got the ball, I got to hit first, and wouldn't you know it, I hit my first ever home run. Everyone was happy for me, but I realized it was a signed ball, and my stepdad was going to be furious. Signed by someone called Babe Ruth. My friends explained the importance of the ball, and we all worked to get it back. We designed a contraption to get it, but that didn't work. We created a pulley system to lower one of my friends so he could get it, and we pulled him back. Strike 2. Eventually, Benny decided he was going to jump the fence and get the ball. He put on his fastest shoes, the kind guaranteed to make you run faster and jump higher. He jumped the fence, got the ball, and made it back over the fence. The problem was that the beast jumped over the 10-foot fence too and started chasing my friend. Benny jetted around the entire town with that dog chasing him. I mean, like through the streets, a swimming pool, a movie theater, everywhere. He made his way back to the baseball field, jumped over the fence, and the dog pushed his way through. He was looking at my friend, and the fence fell on the dog. We ended up getting the fence off of the dog, and the dog ended up being really friendly. We knocked on the door to explain to the owner what had happened. The guy said, "Why don't you just knock on the door? I would have gotten it for you." It still ended up being the greatest summer of my life. Story 25. Not really in the spirit, but it reminded me of a really bad manager I had. She got upset with me during a meeting and said, "In the future, do exactly what I ask you to." She'd make a habit of standing at my office door and clearing her throat. I'd continue working for a few minutes and then pretend like I was saving the project I was working on. One day, she handed me an inter-office envelope and said, "Take a look at these. When you figure out what they are, put them on my desk." So I said, "Okay." I opened the envelope in her presence and saw they were all requests to close accounts. I put them back in the envelope, walked past her, went into her office, and placed them on her desk. Walked back towards my office, past her, sat down, unlocked my computer, and started working again. And she continued to stand there. After a few minutes, I looked up and asked, "Did you need me for something else?" She just said, "Well?" Looked at her in confusion and said, well, what?" She said, "Are you going to tell me what the documents were?" I said, "Oh yeah, they were requests to close client accounts." She asked when I was going to tell her. I said, you told me to look at the documents, and when I figured out what they were to put them on your desk. You never asked me to let you know what the documents were, and well, you did tell me in front of the entire team to do exactly what you asked me to, so I guess in the future be a better communicator?" Story 26. Small scale, recent example. I recently informed my dungeon master of 4 years that I was going to be leaving the campaign, citing that we didn't communicate well and that my playstyle created friction in the group. The full story is that I found her DMing style to be far too railroady and focused on the story she wanted to tell, not necessarily on the game we wanted to play. I also felt that her spouse was playing a truly obnoxious character. Now, normally, I would have just addressed my issues directly to the DM and we'd work it out. That's pretty standard, and I have known this couple for over a decade. Should be easy to solve, right? Well, the thing is that I did reach out to her the first time an issue came up where I felt a session was thoroughly unenjoyable. Long story short, I had no ability to interact with the world and had to wait 2 hours real time to actually do anything that session. Because we all play remotely, I messaged her over Discord and laid out my concerns and hoped we could discuss it. The result was essentially a panic attack where she went radio silent on me and put the campaign on hold for weeks. All this did was tell me that bringing up table issues would not result in a conversation. Anyways, more and more issues piled on over the next 3 years and my patience finally ran out, so I decided to bail. If she'd been willing to talk about things 3 years ago and have us both get on the same page, I think a lot of frustration could have been avoided. Story 27. My ex-best friend and I used to work together. When I left that job where they treated me terribly, I got a job doing shifts. They were always the same pattern, and every 4 weeks I had a week off or so. I had plenty of free time, more than I'd ever had before. She worked Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, so I would come see her after she finished, but before I started work or on one of my days off. Same pattern, unless I took overtime. One day I thought, hang on, I'm doing all the scheduling here. I drive, but she doesn't, so I'd given her leeway before now. So I waited for her to ask to hang out. Nothing. We still talked, but she didn't invite me out. When I finally brought it up with her, she said, "You work shifts. How am I supposed to know when you're free?" I said, "You ask? You literally have to just say, 'Hey, I'm free Friday. Want to hang out?' And if I'm free, I'm free. And if I'm not, well, we'll do another day." "Well, I don't want you to say no." So I said, "Look, you'll make me feel like you care if you just ask a simple question. Like, that's how adult meetups work. You ask if someone is free and you make a plan together like I've done for you." And the conversation just devolved. It hit me that she didn't give a crap because if she did, she would ask a simple question to make me feel like she cared instead of me organizing everything and running around after her. Best friend of almost 5 years down the drain because she just wouldn't ask. Story 28. I do contract work for various companies. One of the companies wanted the server I installed to have a static IP address on their network so that they could always access it through that specific IP address. I did it exactly how they specified, and that was by having the device assert its own static IP address. I told them that this could be a problem, but they didn't listen. I also told them that if they ever wanted to make a change to the network, that they should contact me beforehand so that the system I installed wouldn't break drastically. I even told them I'd go out there for free and manually make the change myself if they just called me in advance, so they could keep running seamlessly. And I even put it in the contract terms as a special exception for their company if they just called me in advance. I specifically said this because they had been hinting that they were thinking about replacing their entire network. Well, at 9:30 p.m. on a Tuesday, I get a panic call from one of the managers at the company saying, "We can't access the server." I asked them if they had made any network changes, and the manager said they had replaced their entire network and that they could no longer access this server. I told them, should have called me beforehand. Added them to my normal schedule, which was already booked 3 days out, and charged them my full service call rate. Cost the company a lot of money in both lost revenue and expense for the on-site. And if you learned a thing or two from these stories, here's more for you. YouTube thinks you're going to love this. I'll catch you in that video.